Hey everyone, welcome back to another video for Theophos Supreme Lighting System. In this video, we will continue the series of looking at the different behaviors, going through each of the settings, and kind of giving you guys an idea of the amount of customization you can have. In this video, we're going to be looking at the flickering. Last video, we looked at just the static light that just sits there like this. We looked at changing the colors, the intensity, all of that stuff. So for flickering, the first thing we're going to want to do is select the light, go to General, and then under Light Behavior, we're going to change this to Flicker. If we hit play, we're going to see that our light is already set to that behavior. Now, one thing you might run into if you're using default settings, warm-up duration is defaulted to 5. So you might run into this problem where you hit play and you don't get the behavior right away, and then it suddenly kicks on. The reason it's doing that is the light is warming up and then it's triggering the behavior. So if you want to get straight to the behavior, you just set this to the minimum value, which is 0.1, and then you're just going to get straight into the behavior. Let me go ahead while I'm here and rotate this guy facing the light so we don't have to keep turning around. Okay, so getting straight into this, if I go down to our behavior tab and open up Flicker, we're going to see a couple different options here. We have Flicker Sound, which is currently empty. We have Flicker Volume, the minimum and maximum flicker speed, and then this emission scale, which we don't really need to touch. It's just kind of setting the ratio between the light intensity and the emission intensity. In case you run into situations, which you shouldn't, because this is set at a default already that usually works. But if you're running into situations where the light intensity is going low, but the material emission isn't following it, then you would want to set this emission scale right here, just to kind of fine tune the ratio. I think we default, if you read this tooltip, we're defaulting at a 2:50 ratio. So that means if our intensity is set to 50, then our emission intensity during the flicker is going to be set to 2. Right now we're set to 25 again, just to keep things low. And you might have heard when I hit play that we already have a sound going. And if you listen closely, let me actually stop that real quick. Go to our sound. Let me set the idle volume up to something like 0.5. So if you listen closely, you might hear that the sound is following the light intensity. So it's going in and out with the flicker pattern, which is very nice, because if you do swap out the idle sound, then it's going to still follow that dynamic pattern. I'm not going to do that in this video just because some of these sounds are very loud and I don't want to risk blowing up your earphones or your eardrums. So I'm just going to keep the same sound we had the last time. But I do want to address that this is the default. So if we come back here to our flicker settings under behavior, we don't have any sound set for flicker. And when you don't have a sound set for flicker, it's going to then default to whichever sound you have under idle sound. And if we don't have any sound set here, then you're going to see it's just going to be completely silent. I'm going to Control Z that, set the sound back. So our minimum idle volume, we don't really have to deal with. That only applies when we're doing the randomized idle volume, which I actually should have ran through in the last video. Basically, that's just a quality of life feature where if you have a room full of lights and you don't want to go light by light and try to set their volume slightly differently to get a little bit of dynamic change between the lights, you would just click randomize idle volume, and then it's going to pick a volume between these two right here. So some lights will be 0.1, others will be 0.5, and then of course you can change that range to whatever you would like. Most people aren't going to notice it, but it's one of those little subtle things that people might pick up on subconsciously. So if you wanted to quickly iterate on a bunch of lights, that's how you would do it. Anyway, back to the flicker. If we have an idle sound here, this is what it's going to use by default. But if you have your own custom sound, say I set something in here, I pick one of these flicker sounds. I'm going to pick this one. Again, I'm going to turn this on. I'm not sure how loud it's going to be in the thing. Actually, I'm just going to select it here, and then we'll adjust the volume. So if I set a sound here, this is going to be considered a custom sound. So then it's going to bypass the idle sound here, and it's just going to use this one. So if I hit play, you can hear that the sound is completely different. Now we're using the custom sound. What you might also notice is we're also bypassing the connecting the volume to the light intensity pattern. So the sound's just going to play, and it's not going to be dynamic according to the light intensity. And the reason I did that is because if you're bringing in your own sound, like we just heard, it's going to already have its own pattern baked into the audio. And I don't want to stack on top of that the different volume, because you might not want that. You might already have a sound that you like, and you just want it to flicker, right? So I don't want to insist on using the Theophos setup where it's dynamically changing the sound. If you still did want to use the dynamic sound, then you would just swap out the idle sound. Where are you at? You would just swap out the idle sound. Okay, there we go. So you can hear that you're also getting the custom sound here, but you're also getting that dynamic change. And that might be something you want. So you would just swap it in for the idle sound instead of the custom flicker sound. Okay, that was a long-winded way to go about that. Let's go back to our behavior, back to flicker. I think let's set this back to an idle hum. Number 6. So we have flicker volume, and again, I should have demonstrated that when I had the sound set up here. This only applies if you have a custom sound. If you don't have a custom sound, then the volume is going to be changed right here with idle sound. If you do have a custom sound, just to keep you guys from having to switch back and forth between tabs, if you use a custom sound, then the volume is going to be changed through the flicker volume. Minimum and maximum flicker speed are exactly what they sound like. This is just a random range. So it's going to choose the amount or the interval of the flicker based on what you have here. So the minimum is going to be 0.02 seconds. The maximum interval between flickering is going to be 0.15, and then it's going to pick a range randomly between those. So if I was to say choose something like 0.1 and 0.1, you're going to see that it's going to be very consistent in the speed that it flickers. So it's a set pattern in that case. And if I wanted something, let's say 0.5 and 1 second, you're going to see that it's just going to be a slower flicker. And then it's also picking a random intensity, because what it's doing is up here in the intensity, it's picking between minimum intensity and then the light intensity itself. So it's picking any range between 0 and 25. If I was to set this as, let's say 15 for the minimum, we're not going to get those full dropouts anymore where the light goes completely off. It's just going to pick between that. And then you can see the emissions also changing there. And then that's the emission scale again. Is not really anything you need to touch unless you get into a situation where you're light is going very low. Like, let's see if we change this to like 10, and then we change the minimum to 0. We don't necessarily want the, there we go. That's a good example right there. We don't necessarily want the intensity to go very low, but then the emission stays very high, right? It throws the illusion off. So the emission scale is deciding like the ratio between the full brightness and then how bright the emission is. So again, if you read the tooltip, if our intensity is set to 50, then our emission is going to be set to about 2.5, and then it's going to scale with that. So as our light intensity goes down, our emission scale is going to follow it. And that should be set already where it works with any intensity that you use. But if you do run into issues where the emission scale is just kind of not behaving like you want it to, you would come to emission scale here and start messing with that. But I think that's going to do it for this video. I think we went through everything in the Flickr. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. Other than that, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.